First of all, this shit is 32-bit file system, cause it's fat as fuck. Second of all, if you like the music, check out video description. I'll spread some links here so you can visit band's channel and check out their EP. Third of all, just as always, I'm gonna teach you all how to achieve this kind of sound, so let's do the shit. Y'all already know how we do the shit. 2 guitars panned 100% left and right routed to guitars bus and that bus routed to mix bus. Both of them guitar channel shits has exactly same shits on it, so let's do the shit. First thing here is our regular ass 808 screamer with these kind of settings. It adds bit of brightness to the sound and prepare it for amplification stage. Next thing is bias with my custom-made Thal free all preset. This shit was designed for low-ass tunings, such as drop Z and also drop Q kind of shit, so you can grab your 99-string guitar and play some shit using my shit. Here's the settings. You can see that cab module is disabled a little bit, cause this shit isn't djent enough, so we're gonna use my custom-made Impulse of 4x12 cab mic'd up in cone edge position. Check this shit. You'll find info about download of this Impulse and some other shits at the end of the shit, so you can get the shit. Next thing in chain is a Taupe Ozone 5 exciter. This thing splits the spectrum to 4 bands and gives each one of them some tape saturation with little bit different amounts. As a result, we get more focused tone. And at the very end of chain we have non-linear summer from Waves. This thing gives us bit of character of real big ass consoles preamp, so we killing that shit now. As I said, both of them channels goes to guitars bus, and very first thing here is an EQ which reduce resonances and also get rid of high-end fizz. Next stop, compressor and sidechain mode driven externally by kick and snare, so we get slight drop in volume while snare and kick hits. This way we give some breath to guitars and also clean up the mix a bit. Next plugin, Valhalla Room Reverb. It's very important to have this one here, because of the fact that we use impulse responsive cab, which doesn't contain actual room response, so we replace it with virtual reverb. As you can see, amount of reverb is very low, so we've got just a tiny bit of it. Is a Taupe Ozone 5 EQ with matching option. To talk short, this thing is an automatic EQ correction based on difference between source and target timbres. In our case, it makes sound brighter and cleaner. Check this out. You'll find this matching session at the additional files for this guide. Next, EQ decrease midrange resonance. Check this shit. And finally another exciter, which affects only one band from 2 to 11 kHz. This way we get needed focus and brightness on highs, but don't get those fizz shits cause we're smart you all. We're gonna use Trillion for bass sampling, so let's check that shit. First of all, pause on this shit very much cause we're gonna use hardcore finger full range thick samples. Second of all, notice that all the FX and amp section is bypassed. We have only clean pickup signal from here, cause we're gonna process it externally to get better results. So that's how DI bass sounds. And here comes main trick. We are gonna split this DI to 3 different tracks and give each one of them different processing to get complex and heavy ass tone. This is how you do the shit. Turn off out of Trillion's track, then create 3 tracks and create send from Trillion's channel to each one of them. This way we can split our bass in real time. Then each one of those FX channels will go to bus some group and that group goes to mix bus. So we'll start from bass crunch. This channel is a crunchy part of our bass tone and that's how it sounds. First thing in chain, 808 Screamer. This thing will give some focus and drive to our bass little bit to make it fire. Right after we have bias with my custom made Crunch Your Ass Up preset. Here's the settings. Next thing, EQ. Low cut, little ass drop in warmness zone and some cuts at mids and highs and also high cut for cutting out some fizz. And the last thing in chain, this little simple ass delay. This thing fixes phase delays between 3 channels of bass, but we'll return to this shit later. Bass high gain. This channel is kind of similar with previous one, but focused mostly on highs and more distorted. First, Tana Forgeman ass pause on it little bit too. Here's the settings. EQ which cuts all shits below 70 Hz. Then we cut off mid-range resonance and defeat that fizz. Man, I don't fuck with that shit. And at the end of the shit we have our delay to fix phase shifts. Bass sub. Here comes some YOLO shit, check this out. This channel is very low and part of our tone, so we really need Lil Wayne for this cause he's good at this shit. So check this out, Lil Wayne type of bass preset. Here's the settings. And then we have this simple EQ with drop on mids, cause we have some kind of boxiness here. And finally all of them channels goes to bass some bus. But before we'll go for it, let me show you what those delays does really quick. Can you hear that? There is a mess with lows without them shits, so keep an eye on phase when do parallel processing, cause this shit is fucked up. Now group processing. First thing here is Isotope Ozone 5 EQ with matching option. This thing do pretty much the same that matching EQ on guitars bus, but amount of effect is more extreme, check this out. Sound becomes really fat and tight with this thing. You will find this matching session at the additional files pack. Next, EQ defeats 2 resonances at mids and also boost highs a bit to make it bit more brighter. L2 maximizer to have some control on dynamics, and also we get bit of headroom to avoid incoming clipping on next plugin. Check this out. Renaissance Bass Exeter from Waves. This thing will generate some low-end shits for out bass, so it will be more powerful. Check this out. Next thing is an EQ, which gives some focus to very low end. Clean up some unwanted shit at low and mids and reduce that fizz, cause we're gonna use NLS and exciter, so we don't want that shit being boosted up and fuck up all of our shit. Next thing, NLS with pretty big amount of drive. Check this out. Isotope Ozone 5 exciter and tape mode. most of saturation happens on low-end band, to make it less muddy and more focused. Equal amounts applied to second and third bands, and last band is turned off, to avoid a reincarnation of that fizz. As a result, we have more focused tone. Last EQ clean up our high end, because check out how much of them shits do we have here. That shit was dirty as fuck. And before we'll finally go to drum processing, let's check out that bass and mix with guitars one more time. As you can see, we are gonna use Steven Slate drums and Superior drummer modules for drums sampling. In our case, main part of work does Slate, while Superior is being used for triggering of kick and snare to make it really powerful. Before we'll go for processing, let's look inside of booth of samplers and figure out the routing. Here you can see names of used samples, bleed routing and bleed levels, and finally levels of each mic. As you can see, we use multi-out output mode, so every mic or group of mics has its own output channel outside of Slate sampler. Check this out. Kick goes to mono out 9, which is KDSSD channel. Snare deer goes to mono out 13, which is SD14 SSD channel. Snare top and snare bottom goes to mono out 10, which is SD-SSD channel. Right and overheads goes to stereo out 1, which is OH channel. China goes to mono out 12, which is China channel, and finally room goes to stereo out 2, which is SSD-AMB channel. Now Superior drummer. Here's names of samples. Notice that alternate option is enabled for main kick, which means that every second hit will be switched to second kick, so we got some kind of additional humanization this way. Now I'll show you output parameters, and while I'm doing it you can keep an eye on drum levels. All 3 kick drum mix goes to out 1 2, which is KDSD channel. All 4 snare mix goes to out 3 4, which is SDSD channel. And finally all of them room mix goes to out 5 6, which is channel called SDAMB. Notice bleed amount for room mix. Now let's check out routing of them shits outside of samplers. KDSSD and KDSD channels routed to KD bus, and that bus routed to drums bus. SDSSD and SDSD channels routed to SD bus, and that bus routed to drums bus. SD14 SSD channel routed straight to drums bus, and 4 other channels routed to drums bus too. So now we can finally go for processing of them shits, and we'll start from kick. As you remember, we have split of Superior and Slate kicks here, and none of them shits has any processing on individual channels. It's all happens on KD bus. First thing here is an EQ, and this shape is complex as fuck. To talk short, there is some kind of basic wide shape on it, and all of them little bands is zones that conflicts with other instruments in the mix. Check out what this thing does. Next, EQ clean up the mids even more and boosts highs just a tiny bit. SSL compressor. This thing focus attack of kick and make it bit fatter. Check this out. Our bass exciter focus low end body of kick, in our case it's 53 Hz zone. Next, EQ defeats boomy resonance at lows and also reduce clicky highs, which was increased by attack of SSL compressor. NLS in mic mode. And finally, EQ here for complex integration to the mix. As you can see, we get rid of that fizzy attack which stands out in mix pretty bad way. It sounds more gently now and sits well in the mix. Speaking of sends, there is sends to room reverb, parallel compression bus and send to side chain compressor on guitars bus which we talked about earlier. Next stop, snare. There is no any processing on Superior's snare, but Slade's snare have some shit on it. Check this out. First of all, there was some of that 500 Hz ring, so I used EQ to cut that shit off. And right after we have envelope shaper, which decrease unwanted sustain. Now let's go for bus processing. First thing here is an EQ, which clean up mids and increase highs. As a result we get brighter snare. Check this out. SSL compressor focus 10 milliseconds attack a bit and give it a lot of sustain so it sounds fatter. Next, EQ cut off unwanted lows, decrease annoying mid-range ring produced by SSL and also focus highs bit more. Envelope shaper here for control of tail of snare, because we also use sends to parallel compression bus and 2 reverb buses, so we don't need that much. NLS with drive almost at 0, because incoming signal is pretty loud already. Finally, EQ decrease 2 harshy zones at highs and give slight boost to them highs. Speaking of sends, there is sends to room and big reverbs, parallel compression bus and send to side chain compressor on guitars bus. SD14 SSD channel is some kind of trigger, which goes straight to drums bus. First thing here is an EQ, which decrease harshy highs and midrange resonance. Envelope shaper decrease tail of snare pretty extreme way and focus attack a bit, so this trigger will affect only hit part of entire snare tone. NLS at the very end of chain. Overheads. First thing here is an EQ, which defeats unwanted low end, 2 ringy zones at high mids and highs and also boost highs with wide high shelf filter. Next, EQ decrease 14 kHz zone, which has become too noisy because of previous EQ. And at the very end we have NLS with pretty big amount of drive. China. Here we have simple EQ, which decrease 2 ringy zones at highs. And NLS with big amount of drive at the end of chain. SSD AMB channel is Slate's room channel. Sounds like this. Here we have simple EQ which reduce ringy zone at 530 Hz. At the end, NLS. SDAMB channel is Superior's room mix output. Check this out. First thing in chain, CLA 76 with pretty big amount of compression to uncover character of room. EQ reduce boxy mids and unwanted highs. NLS at the end of chain. Parallel compression bus. This bus designed for strong attack suppression for kick and snare. I'm gonna reroute it to stereo out to demonstrate how this bus sounds soloed, so keep in mind that it sounds much quieter than it actual sound in the mix without all of them compressors and limiters. Here we have pair of CLA 76 compressors with extreme amount of compression on booth. Check this out. Settings is exactly the same except for attack time. First compressor's attack is bit slower than second one. After this pair of them shits we've got EQ, which reduce low end ring, couple of resonances at mids and harshy highs. NLS at the end of chain. Now finally all of them shits goes to drums bus, so let's check that shit. Here we have pair of compressors, each one of them is affected by snare and creates about 1 decibel of compression, so it's kinda snare focused gluing or some shit. Backing melody in this track is played by 3 different synths, and that's how they sounds. We'll start from Synth 1. Here we have pair of H delays. First one works in standard mode and second one works in ping pong mode. Then we have this stereo enhancer to make stereo of last delay bit wider. EQ delete all unnecessary frequencies. NLS at the very end of chain. Synth 2. First thing here is stereo delay with extremely short delay time. This way we generate stereo from mono using Haas effect. Next, EQ decrease zones that sound dirty and also cut off unwanted highs. Stereo enhancer decrease stereo just a bit, because what first delay does was too extreme and we have no other way to control that shit. EQ in mid-side mode. To talk short, this EQ delete all unwanted information from side of the stereo, give it some focus on highs and also clean up center little bit. NLS at the end of chain. Kodo. First thing here is an EQ which decrease ringy mids. Check this out. Right after we have this H delay in ping pong mode, to give it some stereo. NLS with big amount of drive at the very end. Speaking of sends, there is sends to big reverb from Synth 1 and Kodo channels. Room reverb channel. This one gonna give our kick and snare just a bit of short room character, that's how it sounds soloed. Here's the settings of reverb. Right after we have EQ, which cut out unwanted low end and boomy body of snare. NLS at the end of chain. Big room reverb channel. This one affects snare and synths, that's how it sounds. Here's the settings of reverb. And right after it we have an EQ which decrease boxy mids. Before we'll finally go to mastering, let's take a look at them levels and pan settings one more time. All master processing happens on mix bus. This way you can quickly switch between actual mix and reference with one easy click, so let's check the shit. But before we start, notice that input level of this bus has been decreased to -3 dB, because I need additional headroom here. First thing in chain, NLS bus, as I already said in previous guides. This thing is emulation of analog summing of analog mixing console to get warm analog swag and analog bitches, and also controller for all of them NLS shits in the mix. So now I will turn off all of them and you'll hear how much those things does. Next thing is a taupe ozone 5 with matching option. We are gonna use two of them things in this master. So first one will make our timbre just a bit closer to reference tone and second one will polish it for final result. So let's check that shit. As you can see, amount of correction is pretty subtle, but it makes nice effect. As I told earlier, you'll find all of these matching sessions at the additional files. Next thing is a tone major. Here we slightly enhance stereo of lows and mids. Highs is already wide enough, so high band stays unprocessed. T-Rack 670 vintage compressor in mid-side mode. This thing will give us a lot of saturation and also nice control on dynamics. Check this out. As you can see, input gain of center is 2 dB higher than sides input, but because of the fact that center gets about 2-3 dB of compression, stereo field becomes just a bit wider. Next, EQ decrease unwanted whistle at 5500 Hz. Second matching EQ here. As I told before, this one will polish our work for timbre morphing and make our shit sounds really nice. Next, EQ works in mid-side mode and cut out unwanted lows of side of the stereo. As a result, we get more clear and focused mix. And finally, Pro Limiter. Transparent mode allows us to get much compression which will be unnoticeable. Another modes like punch or all around might be much more noticeable, but not this one. So this is how we do the shit. For those of you who want to get an additional files pack for this guide, which include Cubase project, Isotope Ozone 5 matching sessions, my custom-made mix-ready guitar impulse, and pack of Pro Q presets for those who use different DAWs, you will find all of them shits in my private post on Patreon, which will be available after pledging $1. By doing this you also get access for rest of my private content and support my ass up and help me do what I do. Link is in the description. Hope you all learned a thing or two from this guide. See you next time.